I guess we can start off. So, what we're here to do, we're here to talk about the challenge for the FP20 analytics. For those of you who are new here, remember that you do have an option of joining these challenges. It's a completely free challenge. There's nothing you have to pay or you have to, I don't know, sign your soul to the devil or anything like that. You can easily access these challenges. Let me just share the screen in a second. I'm going to quickly showcase you where to find the challenges. So if you open up ZoomCharts website, right here at the top menu, you can find challenges. I'll open it up, FP20 Analytics, learn more. Of course, you need to register. But right here, if you scroll down a bit more, you have all the necessary information you need for it. So you can learn more about the challenge itself, how to participate, the brief. So for example, what type of questions we recommend you to look into, what are the judging criteria and everything. And the most important thing is that we also added here the timeline. So it's a little bit easier for you guys to understand, okay, what's happening, what's the closest event, if we have anything related still to the event that, we're looking at right now. So currently, for example, we can see that this is the workshop. So the one-on-one mentoring sessions are running from the 17th of January till the 16th of February. The deadline for the submissions is the 16th of February. And then we also have the winner announcement webinar on the 21st of February. And of course, the most important thing is right here. You can get the data set and start working on it. Other than that, there's nothing super complicated on how to do that. Just download the data set. And within the data set, actually in this one, I think we're going to have a zip file. Yep, there we go. And within the zip file, you're going to have two things. You're going to have the raw data set itself, and you also have a PBIX file, which has the data model configured for you. So if you want to tackle this from scratch, because the way I would say it is, for those of you who feel more comfortable, always try to do things from scratch. And those of you who have been working with Power BI are going to agree with me, that builds up the skill set, right? You get more and more comfortable with the actual data cleaning, transformation, setup, and everything that's related to that. If you're still new to Power BI, go with the data model just to get you started off. But the more you actually go into the trenches and work with the data, try to clean it up, see how to format it and so forth, that's what's going to build up the skill that's, sought so after the let's say the workforce itself. So all the employers, all the companies, that's what they're looking for, that you are capable of actually going through the data set, cleaning it, forming it, and everything. But there's no shame on if anybody just wants to go the easy route. Hey, I've been there, I've done that. That's how I started off. And only after a while, I started to go through the very basics of it on how to build it and so forth, because I wanted to create things first, right? I didn't know how to do the cleaning and transformation and everything. I just made charts. I wanted to make charts at first. And then I started to learn the data cleanup and all that. But yeah, you have the raw data source and you have the PBX file. So use which one suits your flow better. All right, what else? Where did it go? This one. Webinar jam, there we go. Slides, let's put it back. There we go. So yeah, about the dataset itself. So the dataset was provided to us by an actual customer. So that's a real world dataset. And the one thing I wanted to kind of explain to you guys is the reason why we're going this route, right? Why we're not taking the typical route of showcasing yet another sales demo sample, yet another YouTube dataset or something like that, is because based on the feedback that we're collecting from you, and you've probably all already noticed and marked it down that every single webinar that we have, we ask you for the feedback. So this is a result of those feedbacks. We understood that a lot of you are trying to create actual use cases from actual live data. Now, the tricky part with it is that once you go into the real life, and this is one of the first kind of, let's say, snowballs that gets thrown at you, when you're going with typical standardized data sets, what you see is perfectly configured tables. They're matching up perfectly. You have nothing to worry about, right? Everything's just working. It's all good and rainbows and sunshines. In reality, it's completely different. One of the first things that you're going to start to struggle with is going to be the data quality. So the reason why we're going with these live data sets is to kind of transition you more into that area. And the reason why we're doing this is because we noticed that a lot of you are building your own portfolio from these challenges, from the reports that you build with the challenge data sets. And having 30 different sales dashboards is great, but having a diversified portfolio is even better. That showcases that you're ready to adapt to different data sets, different visuals, different requirements, and these sort of things. And that's what we're trying to do here. That's one thing. The other reason why we're going with the real life use case samples is because the data is actually a lot more interesting. Because when you're going with the randomized data sets, typically what you're going to notice is there's going to be one conclusion, then it's random, and within random, everything's random. So there's no real correlation between the data points. It's just a data set that was generated just to showcase some sort of an aspect of a company or any particular kind of viewpoint. But it's not really that interesting. In these cases where we're going with the real life actual data sets, there are more challenges. Sure, it's not always as straightforward as it would be with yet another sales dashboard, right? But the reason why we're going with this is because, again, going through the very basic steps of it, we're allowing you to make the mistakes, try to figure out how to fix them, try to see how to search for information. Every single one of us Power BI developers have gone through these steps. Trust me, for those of you in the audience who have been working with Power BI with me a little bit longer, you probably can agree with me, right? We've all been into the trenches. We've all spent countless hours trying to figure out how to clean the data set, how to get additional information, how to calculate the data and everything. It's not always a straightforward journey. And that's what usually gives you that a little bit of edge when you're comparing yourself to other competitors for a specific position, for example. It's the fact that you're able to adapt, to figure out, to think a little bit outside the box. Now, what else? Remember that you have these data sets that we provide to you, but there is no rule, and we're completely for it, if you can figure out some additional information that you can add on top of it, right? If at some point you decide, let's for example say in this data set, if we look at the data itself, so for example, it's just one quick chart I create, right? So we have the year and we have the semester or period called. Sorry, I'm not sharing the screen. There we go. So this one, for example. So you can see the year and the season or period that we're actually kind of looking into. If somebody decides that he actually wants to also showcase this information on moon phases, go for it, right? There's nothing against that. The main idea about these challenges is try to answer what's asked from you, but everything that you add on top of it is just for you to gain more knowledge and to showcase what you're capable of. Because remember, at the very end of the day, it's all about creating unique kind of showcases of the information, creating that drill down experience where you can click on the columns and you go down into smaller little details, where you start off with an overview and you answer different questions. So yeah, Rigoberto. Hey, Rigoberto. Greetings, and how's your health? Well, it's getting better, right? That's why I'm here. Not fully yet there, but I am getting better. Hopefully, get fully recovered soon. Because let me tell you one thing, having to cough and snot all the time, it ain't fun. Especially when the little ones are sick and everything. It's a mess. but we're getting there, right? It's getting better. But yeah, like I said, you have the data set, you're easily allowed to play around with it. See if you can come up with unique charting types, or for example, unique story that you want to tell with the data. And one thing that you're going to notice in this challenge as well is we actually went in a slightly different kind of route. So under the brief, you have this section. What should your report include, or what type of questions should it answer, right? You can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 questions. And then we added another segment called optional. Now, the optional segment is not something you have to do. It's specifically called optional because it's not mandatory. You don't necessarily have to do this. But the reason we added this is because we want to allow the users who are, for example, over the basic level, getting more into the intermediate level, we want you to give also something that challenges you a bit. Even though, as always, it's not rocket science. We're just here to give something that actually challenges you, something that allows you to play around with the data, come across different information forms, and see how things have already been pre-calculated for you. Like, for example, in this data source as well, what we did is you can see there's a already pre-made calendar, right? There's a DAX measure for the whole calendar. And for the calendar itself, you can thank our data donor because it's completely their work. And this is just to showcase again, right? Not everything comes right out of the box. Some case, you need to adapt. You need to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? Because the typical route doesn't really suit this particular challenge or the report that I'm building here. So these things are going here. One thing that I wanted to remind you guys as well, completely out of the box, but hey, I wanted to remind you guys, is don't try to sit on your report till the very last day of the competition. Try to submit a version that you feel comfortable with. Even if you have few things that you're not fully comfortable with, it's better to submit a version that we can review and we can come back with the individual feedback rather than wait for the very last day and submit it in the very last hours. At the end of the day, we're also all human here. So if we get an enormous amount of submissions at, let's say, the very last hour of the submission timeline, we're just not going to be able to give you feedback on it, right? Think about it. For example, if I'm sitting there and at that point in time when I'm looking at the submissions and giving you feedback and evaluating them, if I have like 10 different submissions at the same time, I can't give you feedback within 15 minutes to 10 different people for 10 different reports for the individual kind of comparison of them. That's why what we highly recommend you to do is submit a report version that you feel comfortable with. We're going to go through it. We're going to give you feedback, and there's always time to improve upon. If you don't want to use that feedback and improve upon it, it's fine. It's your submission, right? It's not like it's a rule that you have to follow. But that's going to give you, again, more ideas to think about, see what you can do about it, and just how to play around with it. At the end of the day, the challenge is, from what Federico has always been telling you guys, from what you heard probably from other challenges, and and from me as well, is the challenges are all about learning. That's what this community is all about. To learn new things, to see how things could be visualized differently, and just kind of give you a little bit of a different perspective. Sorry for a second. You don't have to listen to me coughing, right? It's not that interesting. But yeah, so take all that into consideration, submit your report, let us take a look at it, and come back to you with some feedback or on areas that you can improve upon. There's nothing to be ashamed of. If it's your first time participating in the challenge and you see and hear me speak about things that you've never heard before or never seen before, welcome to the club. That's fine. We've all been in your shoes. We've all started somewhere. For example, things even like some sort of field parameters or something, right? When you first told me that definition a couple of years ago, I would probably be sitting like, huh? What on earth are you talking about? Nowadays, oh yeah, it's field parameters. It's just easy, right? Bookmarks, the same navigation, info panels, all these sort of things. Just don't be afraid to go for it. And of course, take a look at the other submissions. Take a look at the previous challenges. So for example, even if we go here, challenges, let's say the same FP20, scroll down, you can see the previous challenges and the events that were happening. So for example, we can see this one. Oh no, that's the upcoming events. These are upcoming, the previous challenges, resources. I've lost myself. There we go. It wasn't that far. I just couldn't find it. So for example, the December challenge for FP20. Open it up and you can see the submissions. You can open up one of those reports. You can open up an interactive version of the report. You can play around with it. You can play around with the page navigations. You can see how colors, for example, are being created. You can see there's a lot of things changing. And the best of all, you can download that report. So download it, see how it was built. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And you can reach us by sending an email to webinars@zoomcharts.com. Or you can also see, for example, these are the authors of the reports. So you can reach out to them and ask them for any specific questions that you might have. All right, so going into the challenge. So for this challenge, what we have for you is a data set about a particular school system. And what we have here is a couple of different tables. So these ones I've created already as a side. So you're not going to have these in the very beginning. But you're going to have a table for teachers, schools, students, test results, the date table that you already saw there for different tests, for their assessment groups, levels, and so forth. So there are different multiple different dimensions that you can investigate here. And like I said as well, on the website, you have the brief, which tells you what sort of questions should you answer right here. So you can take a look at those as well. Now, once you start to work with it, there's going to be a lot of, let's say, questions that you might have. Okay, how am I supposed to do this or that? For example, let's take a look at the first one. So total number of students per each assessment level broken down by the semester, school year, or school. And this can be tackled in multiple ways. So for example, one of the ways in how we could do this is, let's say I'm going to be using the combo chart. And on the combo chart, I'm going to have on the category, let's go back, total number of students per assessment level. So I'm going to find on test results, even if I don't want to create any specific measures, I could go for something like student ID, add it to series 1, set it to be distinct count. The category is going to be the assessment level. Under test results, I don't have the assessment level. So what do? I go to the test results table and add the assessment level from there. So that is the initial graph. And we need to split it by the semester, fall, winter, spring, school year, and school. Now, I could actually tackle this in multiple ways. One of them would be to go exactly like for example, the exercise asked me to. Or I could go to the date table and, for example, choose a combination of year plus the period and semester and use it as a legend. So this gives me a clustered column chart. Now, if you see these clusters, they're actually quite narrowly spread together, right? So if you open up the formatting options of the visual, you actually have right here a tab called column padding. And if you decide to go, instead of a column chart, you go with a bar chart. So with this orientation, it's going to be called bar padding. So column versus bar. Same principle, just different orientations. So we're going to go here, column padding, and you can see here we have 4 different properties. You can choose to either increase the gaps between each individual column. So this is what these 2 settings here are for. Or I can specifically identify and separate the clusters more. And in this case, this is what I'm going to be doing. So I'm going to be increasing the cluster padding on the left and right side to 15 pixels. And you can see now the clusters are a lot more easy to notice and separate visually. Now, once we have this, you could be looking at and like, yeah, but I really wanted to create, for example, a stacked column chart. Sure. All you have to do, again, open up formatting options for the visual, scroll down and find a setting tab called Series Defaults. Open it up, and here you see display. By default, this is going to be on cluster. but you can easily switch it to stacked. It's as simple as that. There's nothing more that you need to do on top of it. If you decide that you want to go the extra mile and, for example, play around with individual setups, you can add more than one series. So the visual supports up to 25 different series. So those are the numerical values that you're plotting on the axis. And you can individually afterwards customize every single one of them. For example, I'm just going to quickly add a value right here. Let's go for another student ID. Again, distinct count. So they're identical now, but I have two series. And if I scroll down, you can see I have series 1 configuration and series 2 configuration. Excuse me, guys, for just 1 second. Be right back. And we're back. So once you have these here, you can see I can open it up. And right here, you have a toggle to customize this series. Now, what this means is that even though I have series defaults running, this is where I customize all the series altogether. But if you have one specific series that you want to customize differently, you can enable this customize this series. And you can see you have all the individual settings for that particular series. Let's say one of the stacked columns that I have here, I convert into an area. It looks funky, right? Because I have this exactly the same data set, but you can see how easily I could do that. You just configure it, and then you play around with the configurations. You can go for stack, you can go for cluster, then you can play around with the stack areas and so forth. So there's a lot of customization there that you can do. So that's one of the basic ideas. Let's see, I have a few questions. So, Prathamesh, are pages that are hidden and utilized for tooltips considered as part of the report page as the challenge reports and restricted to maximum 2 pages? No. So if you're using things like report page tooltips for multiple visuals, the report page tooltip itself, the page that's used as the tooltip, is not considered to be a separate page within the report. Because at the very end, what you're probably going to be doing is you're going to be hiding them, right? So for the end user, he doesn't really know that it's a page. For him, it's just a visual element. Get another one from Toyin. All of a sudden, the ZoomCharts unlicensed logo started showing up in my visuals. How can I take it out? I'm signing in Power BI with my ZoomCharts credentials. Okay, I have a message from the team. Just a sec. Okay, yeah. So what I got from the team is that this is currently a bug. So apologies for that. This is something that Microsoft is investigating on their side since it's caused by one of their updates. And current ETA is that it should be fixed plus minus this week, beginning of next week. So apologies on that. But yeah, always, if you have any sort of these type of questions, issues, or anything, always reach out to us, because if we know about these things, we can talk about it. We can figure out what's really happening there. One question, does the calendar have a special treatment being divided by seasons? So in this case, the reason why it's being divided by seasons is because school year is typically divided into specific periods. It's not a typical calendar where you have a spring, fall, autumn, and a winter, right? And one specific period, season, or whatever it's called in a particular kind of, or let's say, region, it can include multiple seasonalities. So let's say the winter could be 1 month from the autumn and 3 months from the winter, right? So those things need to be taken into consideration. And in this case, the data owner is already accounted for it. So you have specific dates and periods that are accounting for exactly all the necessary months and everything. So you can see here it's being divided into specific segments. All right, let's keep moving. So we went through this one, right? The total number of students, each level, divided by semester, school year, school. Like I said, we could utilize the approach of looking for already combined data to kind of go on the first glance. But you can also go with the drill down approach for every single instance of it. So let's say I remove the assessment level and I use the assessment level as a legend this time. So let's find the assessment level, put it in the legend bracket. And as for the categories, so I'm going to go with the hierarchy that's mentioned here. So semester, school year, and school. All right, so let's go for the date table. Let's go for period semester. Let's go for the year. And the last one was school. So in this approach, what I basically do is I have all the information within one single visual. And I can choose, for example, winter season. I can choose between two different years, where seasonalities, and look at the individual schools. Again, there's nothing in the rules that doesn't say, for example, that you could create 3 different charts, one underneath each other. Just think about the user experience, right? Which one makes more sense? You could also do something like this. You can also play around with the field parameters. The reason why we're doing this as well is because, of course, our visuals also support this approach. So for example, if we're looking at these 2 requirements, right? The total number of students per each assessment level and assessment level group means that we already have 2 different splits. By utilizing the field parameters, so the way you make field parameters, of course, is go to modeling, new parameter, fields, and then you add all the necessary groups. So in this case, it would be the assessment level and level grouping, these 2 variables. And then just add the slicer and use that as one of the properties. And you can see this allows me to switch between different views. The same way, I also have these parameters here for year and period semester, individual year, or school name. So I can easily say that, okay, I'm actually interested in the level grouping and I want to look at the school name. I want to look at a particular year or the year plus the period used in the question. So that allows you to play around with it. Whenever you are using field parameters, one of the ground rules that I would always set for myself, and this is what I recommend you to always think about, is the customization of the slicer. Because by default, it's going to be looking something like this. So just a regular one, right? And the default behavior for it is that you can see you're allowed to have multi-select. But if you think about the logic of the visual, you can't really have 2 different ways of grouping the columns, right? You can see they're both selected, but only one of them is still visible. And what does it cause? It causes confusion for the end user. So always make sure that if it is understandable and if it's suitable for the use case, sure, keep the multi-select. If not, never leave that option available. Just say that only single select is the option that you want to go for, and the user has no way of selecting both of them, even if he tried to use control. Trust me, small little things, but they make the whole experience, whether it's going to work, whether you're going to break it. So we have another question from Dank. Can I add a customized sort and drill down waterfall visualization? I mean, it goes winter, spring, fall, and I want it to be spring, fall, winter. Sure. So one of the properties that we have within the waterfall visual is you can see category, change, total, and sequence. So if we're going to go for the regular period, so for example, that's the period, and then I'm going to add just the student ID as the change. Something like that, right? Not really correct results because it's not really summing up, because the same students that were probably in spring are most likely half of those students are in the next period. But the idea is here. So If you want to adjust the sequence of these, you can look at the data set. And in this case, for example, under dates, I'm going to close the DAX window, formula bar. There we go. Let's see. So period sequence we had, I think, yeah, period semester sorting. So we have a column that allows you to see which one is 1, 2, 3, or 4. So what I'm going to do is find it in the list here. There we go, period semester sorting. And there are a few ways on how you can do this, but one of them is add it to the sequence field. So that's going to follow the logic. The other way on how you could do this is by creating, again, another custom column that allows you to specifically define where each segment is underlying. So the sequence field is what allows you to do this. All right. So we talked about a little bit about the field parameters. What else is there? If we go down a little bit lower, so these ones are very similar to each other. The only difference is that you're talking about the assessment levels and assessment groups. And in this case, you're talking about, again, the assessment levels and groups, percentage of students. So similar principle, just different metrics. These all could be identical visuals, or those could be 4 different visuals. This is up to you. This is where we give you the freedom of deciding of how you want to tell your story. Now, what else is here? For example, exercise 5. So students whose assessment level is between 80 and 90 are essentially going into a group called intervention group tier 2. And the reason behind it is because these students need a little bit of extra help from the teachers to get their grades up. And if they're in tier 2, this group contains 10 students that requires 1 teacher. So 1 teacher per 10 students. So the way and how you could do this is by, again, playing around with different calculations and measures. You could create that to be a single measure. You could do that with calculated columns. You're going to have a lot of information on the web saying that try to never use a calculated column if you can use a measure. Sure, that is the best practice because measures are not as resource heavy as calculating a new column. There's also other reasons behind it. For example, calculated column is only ran through once you open up the data model. So once you open up the report, it's calculated once at the runtime, whereas the measure can be dynamic and it can be recalculated as many times as you need to. The way I say about the columns and the measures is at the very beginning, use whatever you feel more comfortable with. If you are more comfortable with generating new calculated columns, use that, knowing that this is going to affect your performance in the long run. But that allows you to create something on the initial draft. That is what I did as well when I started off. I didn't feel very comfortable with the DAX, so I was creating calculated columns because the logic for that was a lot simpler for me to, let's say, just go through. Whereas measures and the full extent of DAX was outside of my brain cells at that point. It took me a while to get there, right? But yeah, create calculated columns, use regular measures, whatever allows you to achieve that goal. And in this case, what I did is if we go down to test results, you can see here I have calculated columns and I also have measures. So it really depends on how you want to go about this. In the calculated columns, for example, tier 2, this is one way on how you can do it. So intervention group tier 2. And the reason why we're doing a related is because if you're creating a new column, the column can only reference other columns from the same table, unless you use a function called related. Related allows the context of this particular calculated column to look at the data model and say, hey, I'm actually related to this side, to this side, to this table, to this table, so I can take columns from the whole model. If I wouldn't be using related, I wouldn't be able to reference this particular column. So that allows you to play around with those. And I'll be honest, right? This one simple little change, when I figured out what the related function does, it just broke my mind for a few days, right? Because I was so used to only having the ability to reference within one singular table that it just kind of broke me for a day or two. But it gave me a lot more strength afterwards. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying that, hey, if this particular entry in a particular row, the assessment level is below average. Now, why below average if we had between 80 and 90, right? Is because if we look at the data, I know there's a lot jumping back and forth, but this is how you're going to be working with the data set as well. If I go to test result levels, the table which explains me all the levels and groups, I find assessment level. I can see the score is 80 to 89. It's a lot easier for me to check against this one than to check against all the individual scores. That's one of the reasons. And in this case, the other one, tier 3, is whenever it's below 80, right? Since it's not a specific segment that we're going into. So tier 3, the formula is a lot simpler. If the standard score is below 80, then it goes into intervention group tier. The other ones don't go into it. So, and this is one way on how you can go through it, right? I could say that this allows me to understand, okay, how many exactly students are in tier 2, how many students are in tier 3, and so forth. And this is what I'm looking at in this page. So we can see that there's 732 tier 2 students and 796 tier 3 students. Now, for each of the tiers, if you remember, we had additional rules applied. That tier 2, each group of 10 students requires one teacher. And the questions we need to answer is how many teachers will we need for the winter season of 23-24 based on the fall results of 23-24. So I have a little slicer here. I select 23-24. These are the numbers for that particular season. And these two, what I'm basically doing is I'm dividing by that number. You can see dividing by 10 and dividing by teachers, dividing by 5. I'm also using here a round up function. The reason why I'm doing this is because without it, you're going to have something like, well, quick math, right? 732 divided by 10 is going to be 7.32. Since we can't really have 0.32 teachers, 73.2, sorry, we can't really have 0.2 teacher, we have to round it up. We can't really round it down because that means that one of the teachers or more teachers would have more students that allowed. So we need to round it up, right? We need to increase the number of teachers versus the actual students. And I'm doing the same here, just dividing it by 5. Now, once you have that information, you again can start to play around with how I want to visualize this. And the first idea I had was like this. So I started off with the combo chart, sorry. And I went with the school name on the category axis. And I went with the total student count as series 1, tier 2 students as series 2, and tier 3 goes into series 3. So now I basically have the total number and the 2 tiers below it. So the 2 subgroups that I have based on the rules that were given to me. And I want to make sure that I can visualize this in a little bit different manner. So what I want to do is I want to have a column at the back, and I want to have a stack of these two in front of it. So I'm going to go here and individually customize the series. So first of all, what I'm going to do is play around with series 2 and 3. So series 2, I'm going to go ahead and say that it's going to be sitting on stack 2. Nothing changes here at first. Series 3, is going to be stack 2. The reason why we're changing the stack numbers is because I'm defining which column sits on which column. So right now they're on top of each other. You can see that. So once I have those, what I'm going to do is go to series 1 and say that this is going to be sitting on a separate cluster. Now, visually, it's like, okay, what the hell did just happen, right? It's hard to understand because every single column is the same width. But what we can do here is we can go ahead and say that the series 2 and 3, which were the tier 2 and tier 3 students, they're going to be more narrow, and I'm adjusting the width percent. They're going to be more narrow than the total at the back. The numbers now kind of don't make a lot of sense. That is because I'm missing one crucial part, which is the year, period, and semester, and I'm going for 23-24 fall season. And this gives me an understanding of, for example, how many students in the particular school were in tier 2 or tier 3, and how many were above it. So that's the total number of them. If this doesn't give you a full context, let's just go ahead and play around with it a bit more. So I see that I could do some quick math, right? For example, count the 2 student tier 2 plus 3 at 3 minus the total, get the number. Well, let's be honest, who has time for that? So what I did is I have the student count. And what I'm going to be doing is I created, again, a new column, which allows me to divide them into 3 different tiers. The same rules that I applied here for individual columns, I'm making one singular column. So it allows me to define whether they're in tier 2, tier 3, or no tier. You could rename those whatever you want, as long as it does help you to tell the story. I call them no tier because I thought that, naming them okay students, for example, would make these feel, kind of left out. It's not that they're bad students. It's just they need some help. So I'm adding this into the legend. And again, go to the formatting options. In this case, I want to stack them all together. So just a regular stacked column chart. And you can see if I hover over it, I can see the total number of students, how many were in tier 2, tier 3, and how many are in no tier. So that allows me again to just play around with the different ways and how you can visualize exactly the same data set, exactly the same information in multiple different ways. It's what allows you to, again, play around with the visuals, go for those unique looking combinations of how things could be showcased a little bit differently. Scott, would you consider using a summarized table for that calculation? Can you remind me which was the calculation I was looking at when you asked that? Let me know, Scott, and I'll get back to you on that. So yeah, this is one of the approaches that you could do here. A few more things I wanted to showcase, but I wanted to also get back to you guys. Anyone has any specific questions, visuals you want me to take a look at, any particular use case or anything, don't be shy. And if you have anything, just ask, right? One thing that I believe in is that there is no such thing as stupid questions. If you have the opportunity, use it, right? What's the worst thing that's going to happen? I'm not going to answer it. Well, you didn't lose anything. Just, it's as simple as that. For student tutors. So for this one, right? uh, yeah, you could use a summarized table. Yeah, that's also an option. This just showcases, again, what you see here doesn't mean that, this is the only way on how this could be done. It's one of the things that fascinated me the most when I started to work with Power BI is that the same thing could be done in 10 different ways. Sure, some are more optimized, some are longer and less optimized, some are easy to maintain, some are not that easy to maintain. But if it gets you the result, go for it. You can improve upon it later on. Trust me, if the manager is going to look at the table, at the report, and it's going to give him all the numbers, but it's going to be working, 30 seconds instead of 15 seconds, he's not going to care that much as long as he gets the numbers and it's showcasing the correct information. The more you work on it, the more optimized you can make it later on. But you have your report done and he has his numbers. That's all that matters. Sorry for that. What else is there? So of course you can play around with all the individual groups and orders and layouts and everything. Like for example, one of the things that I was looking at and this one. So if we go to assessment levels, periods, semesters, yeah, perfect example. Even if I don't have multiple levels, even if it's just a single level. What I do here is, for example, I use the period and semester on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, I'm using the count of students, right? It's not divided by school or anything, so it's just a really rough total number on top of it. And I'm using the assessment level as the legend. So that splits the column into individual segments based on the level of assessment. If we look at it, once I hover over it, you can see that what Power BI has done is it's gone through it alphabetically, and it's also sorted, and in this case, it looks like in a descending order. So, and I can take a look at it and say, for example, assessment level, ascending. Even if I adjusted it, it's adjusting it based on the alphabet. But if you have the data for it, so in this case, we already had this table. What I did is I created another column called level order. And this one, again, uses just a regular switch function, where I'm saying if it's this, do this, this, and that. If you don't want to do this, remember, you have the raw data. You can easily do this in the Excel file. There's nothing against in the rules, nothing in the rules against it. Whatever gets you to the result, go for it. Trust me, nobody's going to bite you for that. So, but I basically create an order here. And what typically happens is a lot of people, figure out that, hey, I can actually sort this column by a different column, right? We've all learned that within Power BI, and I can do it right here. Assessment level, level order. But Power BI is going to be like, well, screw you, man. This is not going to work because we have a circular dependency. And at that point, a lot of people are just like, nah, I'll try to figure out another way. There is another way, which is a lot simpler than what other people are doing. And that is, I don't know who thought about this. I can't remember whose article I read about this, but it has been a lifesaver in a lot of situations. What you can do here is you can create another calculated column, which basically just references the original column. And this column, you can actually sort by the order. So if I change the assessment level to level ordered, you can see that within the tooltip now, we have an understandable logic behind it. So it goes from very good to very poor. If I wanted to go the other way around, I can go here, level order, and say that it's going to be descending. So now I'm going from the lowest level at the top of the stack to the highest level at the bottom. Really depends on how you want to showcase the information that you're looking into. But yeah, comes back to how you want to visualize it, how you want to showcase it, and so forth. What else is there? One thing that you could look into, because that sort of question isn't really asked here, but you can go for it, right? Again, you're in full control over how things work and what you're looking at. Let's use the combo bar, for example. And I'm going to go for the school name, and I'm going to have two series. I'm going to have, let's say, I don't think we have such a rule in dataset right now, but let's assume that the teachers who have, let's say, a group in their responsibility for tier 2 cannot also have a group of tier 3 students. So what I'm going to do is use these calculations for tier 2 and tier 3 as series 1 and series 2. So that tells me how many teachers I need for this specific school and for these two specific tiers. Now, the only thing that's missing really is if I go to teachers, teacher ID, uses series 3. Of course, not the first, but the distinct count. Use the trial. And we can see here that if the rule that I just said is in motion, that a teacher cannot simultaneously have a tier 2 group and a tier 3 group, means that I would need to have, if you look at the numbers, right, 34 plus 52 is 86. We only have 73 teachers in this specific school. It means that I'm missing 13 teachers from this specific school to be able to cover all the additional tier lectures or courses, or I forgot what they were called. Classes. Yeah. So extra tier 2 and 3 classes. Again, this is not something that's necessarily asked in these questions, but it allows you to understand and play around with, for example, different views. And this is one of the things that we encourage you to do as well, right? These questions here are mainly for you to have a starting point, for you to have something to go for. Because without it, usually it's very difficult because you don't really know how to tackle this. But this allows you to have one specific view for everybody where you can start off. But you can always go the extra mile. And you can, for example, do the calculations based on this. So I could, for example, easily also calculate and have a separate measure for the number of teachers we're missing per period or semester based on the specific courses that we take or anything like that. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with it. You could also look at the information in slightly differently. So for example, if we have something like a network chart, we could have, let's say, the same school name, go lower, find, for example, teacher names we don't have, but we have teacher IDs. And yeah, we can just use the teacher ID as well as the distinct count. And we can, for example, see how different schools or areas, or we actually have a teacher, for example, a school here, which overlaps with multiple teachers. We could go the other way around and see how teachers are connected to different schools. We could also create a measure that's looking and trying to correlate the information and say, hey, if the same teacher is actually part of multiple schools. If so, we would also need to take that into consideration when calculating the tier 2 and 3 teachers, remember? So, and this is the part where it gets tricky, right? You have to think about all those use cases. You have to think about those edge cases and additional questions. I'm gonna go through the Q&A, see if there's any other questions in just a second. But yeah, before you sign off, Sabina already just posted the feedback link. So from my side, as always, right, I'm shameless about it. I'm begging you, please go and fill in the feedback forms. It doesn't really require a lot of time, maybe 2 or 3 minutes tops, 1 minute. Really depends on what you're gonna go for. But let us know what you think about this session. Was it useful, interesting? What else you're missing? What charts you want me to take a look at next time? What other topics? What do you think about the idea of using real life data sources? Is it more complex? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Just let us know all, let's say, aspects of how you're feeling about the challenges. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to provide the best experience possible. We want to provide you a learning environment where you can play around with different data sets, play around with different like-minded people, and just see what you can create as a result of it. Okay, unless I'm terribly mistaken, I don't think we actually have any other questions in the Q&A section. So I think from my side, that's actually it. Those are the main things I wanted to quickly cover and talk about when showcasing this data set, right? There's a lot of different dimensions that you can still explore. And remember, if you want to go the extra mile, go through this. Play around with it. If you figure out how to do this, if you have done all the calculations correctly, great. If you're not able to resolve this, it doesn't mean that you're going to be less, that you cannot win the event. No, this part itself doesn't give any extra credit. This is just something that allows you to challenge yourself to see what if you can answer these questions. Because remember, since this is a real life sample data, these questions is what the original data source also responds to. There was a full list of other questions that we just kind of redacted. We didn't want to, blast you with 50 questions. So we wanted to give you a little bit of freedom. But other than that, I thank you guys for joining. I hope that this session was informative and insightful and you actually managed to learn something new. Yeah, actually, that's my question to you guys. Were you able to learn something new and most importantly, useful today? So we have a comment, well, question here. Isn't it a good idea to use donut charts here? Yeah, you could use also donut charts. You could use combo charts, graph charts. You could also use a timeline, which is a bit more tricky. But for certain analysis, you could also use the timeline. You can use the network charts and so forth. Well, see, I managed to teach something new to Scott, so at least one person here learned something new and useful. So I'm happy about it, and my job here is done. All right, everyone. Thanks for your attention, and I hope to see your submissions. And remember, submit them, get the feedback, improve upon it, and make even better reports. Other than that, I'll see you in the next event for the FP20 Analytics, which is going to be the winner announcement, where I'm going to be joined, if I'm not highly mistaken, by, yes, our dear friend Federico. So see you, and in the meantime, reach out to us if you do have any other questions. All right, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.